Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting lecture on world religion, religion and politics, religion and travel, whatever you want to call it. Our destination today is a sacred city in Senegal called Touba. Now, it's not up there with Jerusalem or Rome or Salt Lake City or the great cities of Benares. It's not a well-known, widely popular sacred city. But for the Islamic world, and in particular for the Murid religious Muslim movement of Senegal, it is another Jerusalem. It is their Rome. It is the sacred city where their founder is buried. So I'm going to take you today on a tour of this wonderful city, put it in its historic context, of course. And so that's why we have our outline. A little bit of background on early Africa, how I got to Senegal, quite by accident, or maybe not by accident. The European expansion into West Africa, and then the Muslim response, which was the Islamic doctrine of Hijra, or retreat, withdrawal. A theological theme which is very important in Islam. And then Peanuts for God. How the Muslims, the Murids, managed to preserve their independence, their culture, their religion, their language in the face of massive superior European military force, cultural force, and preserve their independence. And then finally, the greatest of all holidays, Magal, when millions of Murids from all over the world go on pilgrimage to the sacred city of Touba. So our topic today is going to be a little bit on what makes a city sacred. How does a city become sacred? In this series, we've been talking about a lot of different sacred cities. For example, Jerusalem, the sacred city of the Jebusites, which was conquered by King David and made sacred to the Jewish people when Solomon built his temple, made pilgrimage obligatory. And so until today, Jews pray that they will be celebrating Passover next year in Jerusalem. The prayer, oh, if I forget thee, oh, Jerusalem. Well, another story of a sacred city is Mexico City, where I go very, very often. And here again, the Aztecs, the ancestors of the Aztecs and Nahuatl people, were destined to roam the Americas until their god predicted, prophesied, that they would come across an eagle perched on a cactus with a rattlesnake in its mouth. This spot, they would then know, would be the site of their sacred city, which is today Mexico City. The Mormons with their famous Salt Lake City and Temple Square. When the Mormons were being driven out of the eastern half of the United States, Brigham Young had a vision that in the mountains there would be a great salt lake, and this would be the site of their new sacred city. Benares, the sacred city of the Hindus on the Ganges River, where rivers flow together. They believe that if your body is incinerated after death and the ashes scattered into the waters at Benares, you would be guaranteed reincarnation at a higher level. And of course, there are cities who quite by accident become sacred cities, such as Machu Picchu, high in the Andes and no great spiritual significance, was a major city, we don't really know too much about it, of the Maya, not the Maya, but the Incas of Peru and the area. But when it was rediscovered, it was given all kinds of mystical connotations. And even the New Age religion of the 60s and 70s adopted it and was one of their great cities of pilgrimage. Well, let's get started on our topic for today, and that is the city of Touba. Now, if you look at the map on the right, we see the map of Africa. Well, anybody who's traveled in Africa knows that one of the dominant features of Africa is the bright red area, which we see, which is the Great Sahara Desert, the deserts of Somalia, and the deserts of South Africa, where no civilization can survive. Well, the blue area is rainforest, and we see Congo at the elbow there. Dark blue is the jungle area. Well, there's one area, the orange, I guess we would call it, between the red and the blue, which is the Sahel, which is an area that receives enough rain for agriculture and for people to have herds of sheep and goats and camels. And it was in this band that an empire emerged. Now, if you look at the map on the left, you see the Mali Empire, which overlaps the Sahel and follows the Senegal River and then up into the Niger River into northern Nigeria. Now, the Mali Empire was one of the great empires of Egypt. Now, of course, we all know about the ancient Egyptians. We may know about the Ethiopians, the Abyssinian civilization in the mountains of modern-day Ethiopia. We have the Kilwe Sultanate of the Swahili coast on the right side of Africa, on the east. Well, there were other civilizations, such as the Kingdom of Congo, Great Zimbabwe, which left behind great ruined monuments, the Ashanti Empire in the north, the Carthage Empire, contemporary with the ancient Roman Empire. Well, we're going to focus today on the Mali Empire, which is today modern-day Senegal, Niger, and Chad. Well, the Europeans knew very little about Africa. When Vasco da Gama set out from Lisbon, Portugal, and explored the west coast of Africa, the Europeans didn't even know if you could follow the coast of Africa and go down to the Cape of Good Hope and then cross over into the Indian Ocean. They didn't even know how far Africa went. Many people argued that Africa was a continuous continent and you would never be able to sail around it. Well, Vasco da Gama sailed around it, sailed up the coast of the Swahili coast and across to India. Well, for the first time, Europeans started learning something about Africa. They knew of North Africa, they knew of Egypt, they had heard about Ethiopia, and probably legends of the Swahili coast, maybe even of Mali, they knew something, but they knew very little. Well, for the Portuguese, and then later the Spanish, the French, and the English, and the Dutch, Africa was really not important. A lot of gold came from Africa. They knew about ebony, the very hard wood. We knew about ivory coming from Africa. We knew that the people were Black and many of them were slaves, which were taken up to the Turkish Empire and up into Europe. But Africa was really not that important. The Europeans were interested in spice and silk and porcelain, which came from the Spice Islands, which are today Indonesia and Malaysia. Ivory they wanted because it was made into beautiful carvings. So Africa suddenly entered the awareness of Europeans with Vasco da Gama's first voyage around South Africa, which was a great discovery, and then up and across the Indian Ocean to India. Well, later explorers would eventually continue on to China and the Spice Islands. So Africa became of significance to the Europeans. Well, initially, slave trade was really not that important. When the Portuguese and the Dutch and the English and later the French built towns along the coast of Africa, such as we're going to see Dakar or Saint Louis in Senegal, they were not interested in going into the interior and gathering slaves. They built these coastal towns as a stopping off place where the ships going the whole way to Indonesia could stop off and get fresh fruit, fresh meat, and fresh drinking water. And so they were built as a stopping off place. The Europeans, of course, couldn't go into the interior of Africa, even in Senegal, because it was mainly Sahel or semi-desert. Further south in Nigeria and the Congo, they couldn't go in because of the tsetse fly and other diseases and all kinds of wild animals. So the Europeans hung to the coast. Well, Vasco da Gama's voyage in the late 1400s was simultaneous with Christopher Columbus's discovery of America. And with the discovery of this vast American continent, with a population of Indians, but half of them died because of disease, because of warfare with the Europeans. And so Europeans started looking to Africa as a source of slaves. Between 12 to 20 million slaves were taken from the coasts of Africa, mainly the west coast from Senegal down to Angola, with Congo and Sierra Leone in the middle. In fact, the area in the armpit of Africa, as they call it, was called the Slave Coast because so many slaves were taken to the Americas. Now, the Europeans, of course, couldn't go into the interior and capture slaves. So they made an alliance with the kings and the chiefs of a certain tribe and said, well, if you go into Africa and capture a bunch of slaves and sell them to us, we will buy them with glass bottles, whiskey, guns, iron swords, cotton cloth, and other finished products in Europe. So the Europeans made an alliance with the kings and the leaders of the west coast of Africa to do business. Now, the largest number of slaves, if you look at the map, you see went to Brazil, where they were raising rice and cotton, where they had silver and gold mines. Some 5 million were taken just to Brazil. 4.5 million were taken to the West Indies. About 500,000 were taken to what became the United States. A good chunk went to the west coast of Mexico itself and down into Peru and Chile and Colombia. So Africa became important to the Europeans, not just as a stopping off place on the way to Asia, but as a major exporter of slaves. So how did I end up in Senegal? Well, so often my trips are determined very often by accident. My first trip to India was very simple decision because I was deciding what to do with my usual summer or winter vacation in January. And I was walking to the subway station in my house here in my neighborhood here in Queens in New York. And I saw an envelope on the ground. It looked like it had something in it. So I thought, well, somebody dropped a letter or something. There was nothing written on the envelope. But I opened it up and it was filled with currency from India. So I figured, well, somebody must want me to go to India. So that's where I spent my January vacation. Well, my trip to Senegal was a bit different. I was a student at Harvard Divinity School studying world religions. And this was not a January vacation, this was a summer vacation. I decided to go to Senegal. On the left, you see my passport, my visa, my usual Mexico visas, and this one was for Senegal for the month of August in 1987. That's me on the right. That's what I looked like back when I was much younger. There's me in a banana tree. One of the things that always impressed me with Senegal, as you can see from the way I'm dressed, Senegal is very hot, and especially hot during the summer. So everybody drinks a diluted form of local beer that has very little alcoholic content, but it is to get enough liquid in your body. So I was constantly drinking to avoid dehydration. Well, of course, if you drink 3 or 4 cans of beer, you're going to want to go to the bathroom. And of course, there are no public bathrooms when I was there back in 87. So people would just sort of stop and pee anywhere. And so all over the walls, you see défoncé d'uriner sur peine d'amende. And the fine was 1,500 Senegalese West African francs. So that's one of my impressions, but it was hot when I was there. And of course, like everybody else, I drank my beer. Well, the person who suggested that I go to Senegal was my professor at the Divinity School, Professor Lamin Sanneh, who was South African and became a professor of theology. And I took his class in West African Islam. He's very famous for his book, West African Christianity, and he wrote The Crown and the Turban, and many, many other books. And his book, The Crown and the Turban, is precisely what inspired me to go to see how the crown, the French crown at the time, or the British or the French or the Spanish or the Portuguese royal armies, how they were going to confront the Muslim turban. Were the Christian missionaries going to sweep into Africa, convert everybody, as they had a lot of success in doing, or was the turban, Islam, going to resist? So he was the one who suggested that I spend the summer traveling around Senegal. Well, of course, I did a little bit of reading before on the Empire of Mali, which flourished in what is the Western European Middle Ages up until 1670, when it was eventually overthrown and carved up by the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the British. Well, by 1235, Islam had spread, as you can see from the map on the right. You see Saudi Arabia on the right hand, the peninsula. Islam spread across into Africa, up through Egypt, across North Africa, and Muslim merchants during the 7th and 8th century spread down into the heart of Africa. The Empire of Mali was a Muslim empire. Its cultural language with writing was Arabic. The books are written in Arabic. The great king of Mali was Mansa Musa. Musa is the Arabic pronunciation of Moses. The capital of his empire of Mali was the famous city of Timbuktu, which I also wanted to visit, but political situation made it impossible. So this is the origin of the Muslim people of Senegal. Well, this map, we see the trade routes going north from Mali. You see the city of Timbuktu on the map as the empire spread across the Sahel region. Timbuktu and the cities of Mali were famous for their adobe or mud brick mosques, palaces, homes, and all kinds of other buildings. You see the sticks sticking out on the side because on the rainy season, the mud erodes. And so when the rainy season is open and it gets hot again, well, then the guys have to climb up on these protruding sticks and replaster the exterior to keep it from deteriorating. Now, the walls can be up to 6 feet thick. And in some of these mosques, when you go in and it's 120 degrees outside, it is delightfully cool in the mosque. The homes had very few windows because they wanted to keep the cool air inside and the heat outside. Well, the Muslim Empire of Mali had magnificent mosques, as you can see in the postcard, the Nouvelle Mosquée de Dienne. They used Arabic as their liturgical language and official language. They wrote poetry, they wrote history books. Books that we see here are commentaries written on the Quran. So it was a flourishing literate culture. Now, that does not mean that everybody could read and write. Even if you were just a simple tribesman, well, you had to pray in Arabic. You memorized your prayers, very much like when I was a kid. I learned all of my prayers in Latin, or Jews learn their prayers in Hebrew. Even if they don't speak the language, Muslims were required to pray in the liturgical language of Arabic. Mansa Musa was one of the first kings of Africa, what we call Black Africa, because he made a great pilgrimage from Timbuktu, which you see on the map on the right, taking one of the trade routes across to North Africa, across to Cairo, and performed a pilgrimage to Mecca, which is incumbent upon all Muslims, if at all humanly possible. Well, when he left Timbuktu, which was a major source of gold, which was exported along the trade routes, he took so many camels with giant bags of gold that gold flooded North Africa, spread across into Europe. He would buy entire libraries filled with books and hire scribes to make copies of them. He would hire engineers and architects and professors and generals to return to his capital, Timbuktu, and to make his empire even greater. The map at the bottom on the left, in the bottom right-hand corner, you see Mansa Musa with his giant gold crown holding up a chunk of gold the size of a baseball with his golden scepter. This map was made in Europe because he attracted the attention not just of the African and Muslim world, but of Europe itself. And Mansa Musa became legendary as the great king of Africa. Well, gradually, the Europeans, once they discovered Africa, that you could go around it, the ships had harbors along the coast to get water and fresh fruit and whatever else they needed to continue their trip across to Asia. Well, with the discovery of the Americas, the Europeans started using Africa as a main source of slaves. Well, we see the map in the 1880s where everybody, the French, the Italians, the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Brits, the Dutch, were all carving out coastal enclaves where they would set up forts along the coast and hire the local kings to capture slaves, bring them to the coast, and sell them to the Europeans for transportation across the Atlantic. Well, if you look at the map on the left, you see that little tiny blue area on the westernmost point of Africa that had become, by the 1880s, a French colony. They'd kicked out the Portuguese and started encroaching inland. By World War I, we see 1913, all of Africa, with the exception of Ethiopia and Liberia, had been overtaken and colonized by the Europeans. The dark blue area, which is North Africa, the Sahel, and down deep into Africa, as well as the island of Madagascar, was French. The pink area was British. The green area was German. The brownish area, the green area was Portuguese. The gray area was German. The red area, the dark red area, was Italian. The Spanish had a colony on the coast. And even Belgium had that sort of lavender big colony right in the middle of Africa. So everybody was grabbing chunks of Africa. Wars were fought between the Europeans about who was going to control what. Well, this was all the result of Vasco da Gama's search for spices and empire in the Asia and the simultaneous discovery of the Americas by Christopher Columbus. Africa entered European history with a vengeance. The Europeans carved out their colonies in Africa, and at the same time, they were carving out their colonies in the Americas. The red area were the British. We see the 13 colonies along the coast. The Dutch took a big chunk in the middle of the British colonies, which is today New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. The French took Quebec and the Mississippi Valley. The Russians came across and took Alaska. The Spanish took Florida, California, and everything down to Argentina. The Portuguese grabbed the pinkish area, and that became Brazil. So Europe was interested in Africa as a source of slaves to send to the Americas as slave labor. Well, Gorée, which is an island off the coast of the capital of Senegal, the capital is Dakar, where I spent my summer, the Portuguese built a fort there, which you see in the pictures, the round fort with cannons. They built a small town. And the picture on the right, you can see the prison where the kings on the coast would invade the interior, kidnap slaves, put them in the island, and when the Portuguese came, would sell them to the Portuguese for transportation to Brazil or for sale to the Caribbean islands or even to North America. So beginning in 1450, that little island, which was originally a stopping off place for fresh water and fruit, ended up becoming a major slave exporting depot. The French pushed out the Portuguese in 1677, and they ruled Senegal until the 1960s when the country became independent. Now, Gorée is a well-preserved slave port because it was an island. They were not going to demolish it and build skyscrapers. They would build those on the coastal city of Dakar and Saint Louis. So it really remains very much the way it was when it was originally built. Here we see the map where we see what is today modern-day Senegal. Dakar is the westernmost point on Africa, and you see a map on the right of the island of Gorée, where they have the churches, the house of slaves. They had the military, the harbor, there was a mosque. Today there's a museum. Well, Senegal, as you can see from the map, has an area along the Gambia River, which was grabbed by Great Britain. And that is today the country called Gambia. Guinea-Bissau was another colony to the south. Mauritania was a French colony to the north. So the area that we see on the map was eventually the area carved out of the old empire of Mali and turned into a new country called Senegal. Now, there is a country today to the right of Senegal where you see it's written Mali. That little country took the name Mali in honor of the ancient medieval empire of Mansa Musa. Now, the French at first built a new city along the coast because the Portuguese had taken Dakar and the island of Gorée. So the French built a town just up the coast, which they, of course, named after St. Louis, or Saint Louis, the King of France. And that also was built on the coast as an area for the French ships to stop off for water and later on to fill the hold with slaves and send them to the French colonies in the Americas, whether it's New Orleans or Haiti. Well, there was an island along the coast, and I spent a wonderful vacation, a couple days there in the old city of Saint Louis. And they are very famous for their boat races in the area between the mainland and the island. The bottom left, you see a typical French town. It could almost look like New Orleans with the balconies and everything. The French in their white coats and hats, and the women with their big hats and long dresses. And so the French came, not intent to explore Africa, but to transfer French culture, French language, French religion, French food, French lifestyle to the primitive, in their view, Africans. Well, this is the French cathedral in Saint Louis, and we see a procession that I attended Mass. The picture, if you look closely, you'll see that today, or when I was there, the Archbishop of both Dakar and Saint Louis were Africans who had converted to Catholicism. But walking beside the bishop is an elderly French missionary priest. So the missionary priests came with the intent of converting the people, whether they were pagans or Muslims or had no religion. Part of French culture was exporting French language, French food, French culture, French clothing, and the French Catholic religion. Well, gradually the French expanded their zone of occupation, and they founded the city of Dakar in 1857 to establish their control of the island of Gorée, expanding their colony. Picture on the left, you see the old market in the traditional style. Below that, you see the cathedral of Dakar. On the right, another view of the marketplace with all the street sellers. And of course, there is the modern section with modern government buildings. Since 1960s, Senegal is an independent country. Here again, we see the marketplace, we see old mosques which were present, the bottom, you see a typical French postcard of the era with the Africans dressed in their traditional clothing. On the right, you see how the marketplace continues until today with people selling fruit and other things on temporary street stalls. So the cities are growing in size and remain traditional, but yet more and more modern. This wild takeover of Africa is called the Scramble for Africa. They moved into the interior, the Europeans did, because they realized that there was more to Africa than just slaves or stopping off places for fresh water and fruit. But by moving inland, they opened up new markets for the European finished products, and they could exploit the iron ore, the coal, minerals, wood, the gold and diamonds that were very much a part of the African landscape. And so the French started building highways and railroads into the interior to exploit the land and to market the European finished products. The Belgian Congo in the middle of the picture was especially rich in minerals. South Africa had gold and diamonds. And so this was the scramble for Africa. So it was motivated largely economically to open up new markets and to get new raw materials. But also the Europeans went in with the intent of spreading modern civilization, building schools, building hospitals, converting the people to Christianity, teaching them English, Spanish, French, or Portuguese, or Dutch, bringing them into the modern civilized world. Well, once again, we see the map of Senegal. And during the 1960s, the colonies were gradually given up and they became independent republics. And so Senegal, like all the other countries, became independent. The French resisted in Algeria, giving up their colony in Algeria, and a bitter, bloody war was waged by the French to keep the colony, just as the British waged a brutal war to keep South Africa and modern-day Zimbabwe, which was then Rhodesia. And the Portuguese had no intention of giving up Mozambique and Angola, but even these colonies gradually got their independence. Now, where does Touba come into this story? Well, we see from the map on the left, the French started in Saint Louis, gradually took over Dakar, kicked out the Portuguese, and expanded into the interior, intent on dragging these poor Africans into the modern world and the superior French culture. They sent in soldiers and conquered anybody who resisted, administrators to tax the people, put them to work, exploit the country. French businessmen flocked in, educators came in, building schools and universities, of course, French language schools and universities. Catholic missionaries were brought in to convert the people, build primary schools for the kids, where, of course, they were taught Catholicism. And, of course, in all the school system, the French language, French culture, and French Catholic culture was taught. Women were encouraged to dress Western style. Even the men were encouraged to wear business suits, to wear shoes and socks, to wear underwear, to wear ties and jackets, and speak French if they wanted to have any position in the colonial regime. Well, of course, the French not only encouraged these good Muslims to drink wine, because that was a sign of French culture, and to eat French bread, the famous baguette, to have barbecues, all of this totally ignoring the Muslim rules on food, the Muslim rules on women's clothing, and respecting the Muslim holidays. Sunday became the day of rest in spite of the Muslim insistence on Friday evening and Saturday as the day for the mosque. So what were the Muslims supposed to do? They could rise in revolt, but the French army with cannons and machine guns would mow them down by the thousands. So a certain group of Muslim leaders said, we will not be able to defeat the French or the British or the Portuguese or the Italians. So what is our option? Well, they searched through the Quran and the Muslim teachings at this University of Timbuktu and other places, and they discovered the Islamic doctrine of Hijra. Hijra is a form of resistance, but not fighting resistance. It is withdrawal. So if you are confronted, your tribe is confronted by a bunch of French soldiers with their missionaries and everybody else, your choice is simply to withdraw into the interior. Now, the Prophet Muhammad instituted this technique or this strategy when he withdrew his persecuted followers from the sacred city of Mecca in the year 622 of our calendar and withdrew to Medina. And in Medina, he organized his followers, elaborated his teachings, prepared them for a return to the sacred city of Mecca in victory. So this theology of Hijra is so important in Islamic history that the Muslim calendar, which is used until today, has year one, the year 622, the year of Hijra. So it doesn't begin the calendar with the creation of the world as the Jews do. It doesn't begin the calendar with the birth of Jesus or any other historic figure or the birth of the Buddha, but it begins with the Hijra, when Muhammad and his followers withdrew from Mecca to escape persecution and probably annihilation, went to Medina, where they got organized, and then they returned to Mecca in victory. The Quran, chapter 16, verse 41, and those who emigrated for the cause of God, after they had been wronged in Mecca, we will surely settle them in this world in a good place. But the reward of the hereafter is greater, if only they could know. Meaning withdrawal in the face of insurmountable odds will not only settle them in this world in a good place, but they'll be rewarded by God in the afterlife. So this is year one, the flight from Mecca to Medina, the Hijra, a sacred journey and watershed. And so this is a major theological concept that the Muslims of Senegal, many of them, accepted and said, this is how we will resist the French missionaries, the French military, the French businessmen, the French language, the French lifestyle, French wine, and the corrupting influence of France. The person who gained the most fame for elaborating this strategy and carrying it out is Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba Mbacké, who was born in 1853, just as the French were expanding to the interior. and he died in 1927. His followers were called the Murids and are still called the Murids today. He claimed that he had a revelation from the angel Gabriel, who told him not to resist the French with arms, not to remain in Saint Louis and Dakar and the other French-dominated cities, but he was instructed to withdraw further inland to establish his sacred city called Touba. Well, he withdrew to Touba, gathered his followers. He was arrested by the French and sent into exile, but he returned to Touba, made an agreement with the French not to resist them militarily, but to collaborate with them to a certain and very limited extent. And for that, he was honored with the French Legion of Honor in 1918. So he's one of the great Muslim leaders of modern day Senegal, modern day West Africa, and of Islam in general. So this is how a sacred city was born. He claimed to have had a revelation from the angel Gabriel to perform Hijra. He withdrew, gathered his followers, built a city. And that city today remains the sacred city of the Murids. Now, the role of sacred cities in every religion, as we saw very early on, is very important, whether it's Rome, the sacred city of the Roman Empire and of the Roman Catholic Church, Jerusalem, the sacred cities of Jews, Muslims, and Christians, Varanasi, Benares, the sacred city of Hinduism, Bodh Gaya, the city of the Buddha. All religions have what I call a universal building block of religion, and that is a sacred city. In fact, many books have been written on the great sacred cities of the world, and one of them by National Geographic is on the right, Power, Piety, and People, the politics of holy cities, not in the past, but in the 21st century, according to Michael Dumper's fascinating book. So how did Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba pull off this deal of a century, marrying Islamic theology with the French quest for empire? Well, he negotiated with the French, and he said, all right, these are my conditions. I want no Catholic missionaries or churches or schools in my kingdom. I want no French language schools. Everything will be in Arabic and our language, Wolof. No French soldiers or policemen will be stationed in my city. No French administrators taking census or taxes or drawing up statistics. No French wine or tobacco will be permitted. I remember when I went from Dakar to Touba, I was on a small, one of these collective buses. Well, when we entered the confines of Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba's kingdom, everybody was off of the bus. We were searched. No alcohol of any kind, no tobacco of any kind, no magazines with scantily clad women. Even books and articles in French were confiscated. No French settlers would be welcome in the kingdom established by Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba. So why did the French say, okay, what did they want? What did they demand in exchange? Well, they demanded peanuts. The area of the interior of Senegal, around Touba and the kingdom of Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba, the French agronomists realized was ideal for growing peanuts. We all know peanuts are attached to roots. They grow underground. They need a certain temperature, certain amount of humidity. Now you would say, why were peanuts so important? Were the French into peanut butter? Well, until today, peanut oil is used for baking. It's used in cosmetics. It is a great source of protein, and it is a product that grows very well in the lands that were given to Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba as his kingdom. So the big deal was, we will give you all the peanuts you could possibly want and we can possibly grow. And in exchange, the French stay out of our kingdom. And so everywhere you look around Touba, you see trucks like the one on the right, bags of peanuts piled up. I even saw trucks like that overturned, fields of peanuts being grown and harvested and dried in the sun. Tons and tons of peanuts. Now, I remember buying these big cans of peanut butter. Well, it was not homogenized and pasteurized, which means that if it was sit, the peanut oil would rise to the top and then the peanut paste would be at the bottom. So you had to take out a spoonful of each and then you had to mix them together to get what in the West we would consider to be edible peanut butter. Mountains of peanuts where they would be piled up in the dry season. There was no rain. Then they would be packed in bags and put on trucks. Now, eventually, the French, you see at the bottom, they have Saint Louis and Dakar were linked by railroads. And then they started building railroads into Kaolack, and you see Touba on the map, and into the interior, going the whole way up to the Niger River. Now, this was very important for exporting the peanut crop, which is bulky. Railway stations were built all along the route, and you would see mountains of peanut bags waiting to be loaded on the train, taken to Dakar, loaded on ships, and sent back to Europe. Postcard in the upper right, this is Afrique occidentale, Dakar, Atelier et Dépôt des Chemins de Fer. This is a packing house and station for the railroad. And it was considered so important that people would even make postcards showing the railway station. Now, how did Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba organize his followers? His young followers who wanted to preserve Islam but were being threatened by French culture and expansion are called Talibi, which comes from the word for student. Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba realized that his people were going to spend the best part of each day planting, cultivating, and harvesting peanuts. So, much to the consternation of many other Muslims, he equated prayer and work. On the left, you see a mosque, small mosque out in the fields, and you see on the right the typical depiction of Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba. Once again, you can see how thick the walls are from the door, because it's cool inside, no windows, and people would go in and say their prayer, and then they would leave and go back to the fields. In fact, many people criticize Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba, of course, saying, if it is harvest time for the peanuts, you have to work 12 hours a day. And so he would dispense his followers, his Talibi, from the obligatory 5-time-a-day prayer. And this was highly controversial, saying that he was exploiting his followers, but he said this is the only way that Islam is going to remain uncontaminated by the French colonial regime. His Talibi did not own the land, it was collective. It was a cooperative, we would call it today. Some people would call it communism, where the movement owned the land. The Talibi were workers on the land. Well, in 1887, he began construction of the great Mosque of Touba. Just like the holy city of Rome is distinguished by the Vatican, the holy city of Jerusalem is distinguished by the Mosque of the Golden Dome. Benares is distinguished by the burning ghats where the bodies are cremated. Or say Moscow, the third Rome, the sacred city of the Russian Orthodox Church, is dominated by the Cathedral of St. Basil. So he realized that his sacred city, like Salt Lake City with its Mormon temple, had to be marked by a magnificent architectural monument. And so we see the mosque, typical green dome on the right, 2 blue domes. You see the prayer 4 minaret towers. But to make it even more impressive, he built the giant tower in the middle, which is not typically Muslim. But everything else, the architecture and style, is typically Muslim. And you can see by looking around how flat and sandy the land is. It was only completed in 1963 because it took a long time to build. Inside, you see inscriptions, the poetry of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, and various other decorations written in Arabic, Wolof, and I believe even French. But this was his monumental house of worship, which further transformed Touba into a sacred city, a rival to Jerusalem, to Mecca, to Rome, to Salt Lake City. The interior is absolutely monumental. Typical Hispano-Moorish architecture. It's in the upper left, what they call the skeleton key archways. The arches were rounded at the top with the teeth going around the outside. And then you have the shoulder. So it's like the head and the body. Carpets on the floor, all pointing in the direction of Mecca. In the upper right, we see the grill, which separates the tomb of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba from the rest of the mosque. Surrounding it are open areas of marble where people will once again escape the heat of the day. Sometimes they'll go in and do their 5 daily prayers in the mosque itself. The interior is typical Arabic style, no statues or paintings, geometric patterns. The domes are painted in an elaborate, intricate designs. The picture at the bottom right is the little area where the men go to wash their hands, wash their feet, and wash their face before they go into the mosque to say their prayers. Everywhere in Touba and in Senegal, you see the posters and depictions of the mosque in Touba and typical trademark Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, whose descendants still rule the Murid sect. Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba was also a great poet. You see at the bottom on the right, people selling copies of his poetry in Arabic. I got one of them. I can't read it, but it was sort of like a souvenir from the trip. Well, Islam has spread recently, as we all know, with migration and even as far away as New York City. We see the Bedlam Tuba fashions. 212, it's Manhattan. I think it's West 131st Street in what is today called Little Africa, over around 8th Avenue. And so the name tuba has spread to on a global scale. Taxi drivers have tuba decals on them. There are stores that use tuba, such as the fashion store in Harlem. Now, the main holiday, once again, if you have a sacred city, you're going to have a founder, two universal building blocks of all religion, a founder, a sacred city, a monumental building, such as we saw with the mosque. But every religious movement also has holidays. Holidays are more than just fun and food and partying. Whether it is the Jewish Passover, where a kid asks, why is this night different from all others, and gets a rather lengthy lecture on the history of the Jewish Passover holiday, or whether it is Christmas, which instructs kids with the creche of baby Jesus and the camels and the donkeys and Mary and Joseph, or whether it is Ramadan, we're celebrating the revelation of the Quran from God to the angel Gabriel and to the prophet Muhammad. Holidays are educational. They bring the people together. And here we see at the bottom a picture of the city of Touba with the hundreds of thousands of Murids going to Touba for the holiday. Now, once again, pilgrimage for the Muslims is supposed to be to Mecca, as instructed in the Quran, one of the pillars of Islam. Even Mansa Musa went on pilgrimage to Mecca. And so when Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba claimed that he had a revelation from the angel Gabriel, that sort of raised some eyebrows in the Muslim world, but still it was accepted, more or less, but not by everybody. Well, when he instituted the Magal to Touba, other people got very critical as well, saying there is only one required pilgrimage in Islam, and that is to Mecca. But the Murids of Senegal took to the holiday, took to the pilgrimage. And here we see the 2012 pilgrimage in January. And that is a day to commemorate the departure into exile of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, the founder of the Muridiya Brotherhood for the revival of Islam in West Africa through non-violence and education. So we see on Thursday, 10 a.m. to 1, core readings from the Quran, of course in Arabic, 1 to 1:30, the Zuhur, prayers, and then lunch, documentary, then 6 to 8, an English lecture, because this was in College Park, Georgia, and then 8 to 12 in the evening, a lecture in Wolof, the primary language of the Murids, on the life and legacy of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. So for those who are unable to go to Touba for the pilgrimage, there are many local pilgrimages, such as this one in College Park, Georgia. There's also one in New York. There are several in France, French Quebec, other countries of Africa where Murids have either settled or have gathered converts. 4 to 5 million Murids, though, do go on an annual basis to Touba. And you see them arriving and by the truckloads, by buses, going by collective taxis. And this is considered one of their major obligations. I haven't gone to the pilgrimage yet, but it is on my list of sacred places to be at a particular time. Now, the Murid movement is presided, I believe this is the grandson of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. It is like a dynasty kept in the Murid Brotherhood. The pilgrimage is recorded, and with modern technology, you have YouTubes and television stations and television programs reporting it. Funny and nice experience I had was when I was in Touba, I took a picture of these kids on the left. And you see the two boys wearing the white cap and the white gown. This was a collective circumcision ceremony. And that little boy on the left, I mean, he was so proud because he was a growing up boy and he had just had his circumcision. And so the white gown is worn so that there's no cloth touching the scarred or the part of the body. Well, he was so proud, he just pulled up his gown and showed me that he had been circumcised just like the big boys. But this was a great honor for these little boys to have finally been circumcised. This is another view of a mosque, and this is the Dakar Murid Mosque, just finished in 2019. Typical Murid style with the giant central tower, the four minarets, the domes, green domes in this case, one golden dome, but it is a typical Murid mosque with a giant central tower. Sort of ironic that the city that the French were so intent on converting to Catholicism and turning into a French city with bars and girls on the beach in bikinis and drinking French wine and wearing suits and ties and shoes, that the Murids should have preserved the purity of their religion in exile in Touba, and then following independence have sent missionaries to the rest of Senegal and brought the people back to their ancestral religion. Here again, we see the global spread of Murids. It's no longer an isolated movement in Touba, but it is spreading far and wide in West Africa as an authentic form of Islam, well adjusted to the modern world. Migration to French-speaking parts of the world, French-speaking Africa, France, Belgium, Switzerland have large Murid communities. In fact, there's an area in West Harlem called Little Senegal. July 28th is Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba Day, when there are parades in honor of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. I went to one of the Murid mosques and I interviewed the imam. And just out of curiosity, I said, well, what do the men in your congregation do? What's their profession? And he looked at me and he said, oh, we only do one thing. And I said, what's that? And he said, every man at this mosque is a taxi driver. They take up a collection within the community to buy the medallion, which makes you an authorized taxi driver. And at the time I asked him, he told me that the price of a medallion was $1 million. And the only way that an immigrant from Senegal could raise that much money to get the medallion was by the whole community coming together. So in little Senegal, it's more than just an ethnic neighborhood or a religious neighborhood. It's also one gigantic business enterprise where everybody cooperates. Um, the, Everything is owned by the community. They invest in one and each and other's business. And so it is a cooperative type of business activity. They very often buy old buildings, which are in need of restoration, renovation, redevelop them, and rent out apartments, of course, bringing over more Mourids from Senegal. Now, throughout the United States and France and every other country in Europe, even in South America, there are now large Mourid communities. I visited the Mourid Mosque when I was in Shanghai in China, where so many Mourids have migrated to China, where they are building mosques and having their schools and going into business. At the top on the right, we see that very often in France, which restricts the building of mosques, the people are forced to worship in the streets because of limitations. Many countries in Europe, like under Donald Trump, are seeking to limit the immigration or migration of non-Christian populations. And Mourids have suffered, just like have other Muslims and Chinese and today Hispanics as well. The picture at the bottom on the left, once again, you see a poster with the trademark image of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. On the right, you see a group of Mourids marching in the United States along 125th Street in honor of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba's return from exile. Again, this is the date they commemorate, similar to the Hijra, where he withdrew into exile. Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, actually he was deported by the French, but when he returned, that was when the real history of the Mourids began. Just like when the Prophet Muhammad returned to Mecca from exile in Medina, that was the Muslim year number 1. In 1927, when Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba died, there were approximately an estimated 70,000 Mourids. By 2000, there were 2 million. Today, it is an estimated 5 million. See the book Tolerance, Democracy, and Sufis in Senegal. Once again, Senegal remaining a relatively peaceful, democratic country in Africa, in an area that is plagued by revolutions and revolts and terrorism. The teachings of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba of peaceful coexistence, waiting and preserving your religion has been gaining ground and influenced the culture of Senegal until today. So that brings us to an end. And once again, this is Dr. Ronald Brown thanking you for joining me for this fascinating visit to Touba in Senegal, one of the great sacred cities of the world. So whether it's me in Senegal climbing banana trees, or whether it's me in the picture on the left, building the sacred Ethiopian Christian city of Lalibela up in the mountains, with the church carved out of stone behind me. This is what I do. I travel and study religious expressions, religious movements in this crucial first decades of the new century, 21st century. And if I get dramatic, new expressions of religions as we are entering the third millennium. So this is my Gmail address, ronbrownmedia@gmail.com. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions, please feel free to send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. And I especially value input, how it could be improved, what I could add, because as you know, even from these pictures show, I'm constantly traveling, constantly researching, and constantly coming up with new topics. And so I am not spending an entire lifetime researching one particular movement, but like when Professor Sanneh suggested a trip to West Africa to study the Murids, I jumped at the occasion. So once again, this is Dr. Ronald Brown, thanking you for joining me. And I definitely hope to see you sometime in the future for another exciting lecture. So thank you very much and have a good day.